Listener has unhealthy amounts of buccal cheek fat. Listener has unhealthy amounts of buccal fat. Listener's cheeks are puffed up like cheese puffs. Listener's jawlines are shaping themselves in the form of a squishmallow. Listener's jawline has turned soft. Why is listener's jawline so soft? Why is listener's cheeks so puffy and fat? Why does listener have unhealthy amounts of buccal fat? Listener has a huge amount of face fat. Listeners has an unhealthy amount of cheek fat. Listener has a lot of buccal fat. Listener's jawline is already soft. Listener's jawline has softened. Listener jawline is forced to soften themselves. Listener's cheeks are forced to puff up. Listener's cheeks are forced to be fat. Listener is forced to have a large amount of buccal fat. Listener is forced to have an unhealthy amount of buccal fat. Listener has unhealthy amounts of buccal cheek fat. Listener has unhealthy amounts of buccal fat. Listener's cheeks are puffed up like cheese puffs. Listener's jawlines are shaping themselves in the form of a squishmallow. Listener's jawline has turned soft. Why is listener's jawline so soft? Why is listener's cheeks so puffy and fat? Why does listener have unhealthy amounts of buccal fat? Listener has a huge amount of face fat. Listeners has an unhealthy amount of cheek fat. Listener has a lot of buccal fat. Listener's jawline is already soft. Listener's jawline has softened. Listener jawline is forced to soften themselves. Listener's cheeks are forced to puff up. Listener's cheeks are forced to be fat. Listener is forced to have a large amount of buccal fat. Listener is forced to have an unhealthy amount of buccal fat.